Apparition at Noon by Adobe James. Inexplicably, the dogs died, within seconds of each other. I had been watching them from my vantage point on the cot, which I take to more and more often these days, my refuge from that miserable African sun, which can be compared to an atomic blast furnace this time of year. Bloody sod of a place, this whole rotten country. But the dogs, first one, then the other, had risen, sniffed, and wagged his tail as though a friend or something to eat were approaching him. A moment later they had stopped in fright, howled once, twitched, and lay down to shudder their lives away in the dried grass of the vley. 15 years ago I would have suspected Kenyatta's Mau Mau. Not now. His Kikuyu bandits and assassins have gotten what they wanted. Everything. Now they are all Gilbert and Sullivan major generals in their own black armies, politicians robbing the natives now. Nothing else to take from us, the whites. Nothing except a little patch of red dust here and there, like mine. Green only when the rains turn the vley to swamp. Wretched God-forsaken place, lonely. Very lonely. Especially since Kathleen died 5 years ago. I got up from the cot, mixed myself number 5 for the morning, and went out to do my Christian duty for the dogs, those poor dumb brutes. I owed that much to them. They were my only friends. Besides, they'd start stinking like hell within the hour if I didn't get rid of them. I buried them beneath the flame trees at the far edge of the vley. One dog on each side of Kathleen. Guards, you might say. Mastiffs, to protect her from the hounds of hell. I pounded the last of the earth down on the graves, rolled some rocks over the top, and sprinkled arsenic all around to keep the baboons away. The exercise, the first in weeks, left me winded, but had helped clear my head a bit. I began thinking in earnest. Odd, you know, how the dogs had died, just like that. No one in miles. Damned mysterious, if you ask me. I wiped the perspiration from my face and neck, and started walking back through the brown long grass towards the house. I was halfway there when I abruptly began thinking about the roosters and the hens. Something wrong. Odd. Then I remembered. Of course there had been something. A noise, I think. Last night or early this morning. I had been awakened by their sounds. They had all been squawking as though they were fighting over kernels of corn, and then a note of panic. Yes, frantic it was, in the darkness. And suddenly, silence. I hadn't worried particularly at that time. The dogs were capable of handling anything up to and including a lion or the smartest baboon. I hadn't even bothered to get up and investigate. Should have, I suppose, but the nightcaps had made me lethargic and uncaring. I stood there in the dried grass for a moment, trying to decide whether to check on the chickens or go back to the house for a drink first. Well, I muttered, do it now and get the blasted feeding chores done with at the same time. That way we won't have to come outside again today. I turned and marched towards their coop. No rooster strutted. No hen clucked or scratched the ground. You know, I'm slipping, truly slipping. I really should have noticed all this earlier this morning. I opened the wire mesh of their pen and went in. Only silence greeted me. I peered into the dimness of their coop. Then I crouched down, went inside, and stood upright again, looking down at the poor bastards. Dead, all dead. Just as though they had been gassed. Unnerving. And another oddity. Ordinarily, a dead thing in this area of the world is covered with black flies and white ants within seconds of death. Some subtle jungle telegraph communicates the news, I suppose. But not here. Not now. The only thing moving in the coop was the rapid rise and fall of my chest, and one tiny white fluff of feather, that waved to and fro on the tip of my boot. Quickly I scrambled outside. The sun like a hammer between my eyes caused an immediate headache. That was unimportant though, for I had been struck by something else. The absence of all sound. That sinister, unreal silence was even more startling than a thunderclap. No cicadas, no birds. Quiet, so quiet, unearthly quiet. I have lived in this green and red hell long enough to know danger. Danger has a smell all of its own. Unique, acrid, and also arid. There was that odour now. A smell plus the instinctive feeling that I was under observation. I could feel eyes, a tingling sensation in my skull, as though someone or something were trying to ascertain my course of action. My scruff was crawling. The adrenaline surged and roared through my veins. Fright. I recognised it. Fright. My God, I was actually scared. And the reason lay 150 metres away. I could see it, a burned area. The erythrinas with their blossoms the colour of blood were gone. Snapped off at the ground. In the middle of that scorched area, heat waves. At least they looked almost as if they were heat waves. Shimmered and quivered like a huge mould of plain gelatine. I forced myself to move. Believe me, it took courage to begin walking. There was something monstrous out there beyond that curtain of heat. Only one thing was certain. I was the hunted. It, the hunter. Expecting the attack to come at any second, I began making my way slowly back towards the house. I was unarmed. Frankly, I didn't expect to make it. I willed myself not to look behind me. My heart was lunging around like some poor tethered sacrificial goat as the lion approaches. I made a detour around two white and grey doves lying in the path. They were dead. You should know that I have attempted suicide twice in the past. Half-heartedly, I suppose, or I wouldn't have botched the job. During the last 5 years, I really haven't cared if I lived or not. But now, I feared death. It was all I could do to keep from sprinting the last 50 metres, but I was able to maintain my outward composure and dignity. I climbed the 4 stairs to the porch. I opened the screen door. I went inside. I closed the door behind me and, breathing hoarsely, collapsed against the wall. My knees were quaking. A drink, I thought frantically. I need a drink. And my voice, like the croak of a dying raven, came. No, not now. No alcohol. Don't dull the adrenaline reflexes. Keep the edge on. You'll need it. The gun I wanted was on top of the mantel. It hung just above the discoloured and fading old wedding photograph of Kathleen and me. I took the gun down and broke it open. The shells were in the pocket of my bush jacket. Insert one shell, hands trembling, and not from alcohol this time, into the smooth tube. Another shell into the adjoining chamber. Click. The barrels are locked in place. Click, click. The heavy firing pins pulled back and cocked. For just a moment I stared with unseeing eyes at the weapon in my hand, and then took a deep breath and stepped outside. I stood in the noonday shadows of the porch and looked towards the burned area. I waited. Silence. No wind. The world was holding its breath, waiting with me. Suddenly the feeling of fright left me, along with that cold and hostile presence that earlier I had imagined to be in my mind. There was a slight puff of wind, and the tufted papyrus fluttered like soft white feathers on a baby chick. Down by the scorched area, the heat wave swirled in a little cyclonic movement and solidified. Out there, the shimmering curtain parted, and something emerged. I lowered my gun and blinked when I saw what was coming towards me. Kathleen? I must be going insane. Kathleen? Her negligee was half open, revealing that golden body. its ripe full-moon breasts, its ivory belly, its pungent spice valleys. She came across the vley, smiling at me. That's what she was, smiling, with love and desire. That sensual smile I knew so well. Kathleen! Kathleen! It was a croak, a lament, an unbelieving whisper of hope, a miracle. God, could it really be? Kathleen? She stopped. Her eyes were locked with mine, and casually, but with great feeling, she dropped the negligee and stood naked before me. A goddess. My goddess. She reached up. I saw the familiar blonde nest beneath her armpit, and she removed the ribbon which held captive her long golden hair. Oh dear God, she is so lovely, and I have been so lonely without her. She ran slender fingers down across her breasts and belly, and she moaned. It was her moan. She was alive. I'd been mistaken all these years. She lived, she lived. Kathleen! My earlier disbelief had vanished, replaced by a desire which was sweeping like a raging veiled fire through my groin. I took a faltering step towards her. Now, slowly, she walked towards me. 10 meters away she held out her arms and spoke for the first time, and it was her voice. Truly it was her voice. "Oh, Charles," she said, "I want you so." I raised my gun and fired. First one barrel, then the other, roared out in an orgasm of fire and lead and death. If there had been a third and fourth barrel, I would have used those on her too. Before me, Kathleen dissolved in a shimmer and swirl of silver flame that writhed and convulsed as though in silent pain. Soon all motion stopped, and the silver fire dimmed, turned grey, and fell like unchaste snow to the red African earth. I stared at the thing on the ground. It is the only name to describe it. A being, an alien thing, repulsive, blue-green, fly-like wings with great green veins from which oozed thick pus-like blood, antenna, many eyes, and dead, very dead. An extremely dead and loathsome thing a long way from its home. An intelligent thing, though. It must have read my mind, just as it had the minds of the dogs and the chickens. And it knew about the things we loved most, feared least. The dogs and the chickens loved food, me, Kathleen of course. And it had materialized these things for us in order to get close enough to kill us. It had reproduced my love for me, just as I remembered her best. That night 5 years ago when she had come across the room, removing her negligee as she walked. Her green eyes ablaze like jade beneath an African moon, her alabaster body taut with lust, her nipples erect and moaning with desire. She had said that night, "Oh, Charles, I want you so." And I had stuck my shotgun inside through the window and shot both her and Charles, the rotten black sod.